Harper Audio presents Flashman's Lady by George MacDonald Fraser, read by Colin Mace. The following piece was found in the author's study in 2013 by the estate of George MacDonald Fraser. How did I get the idea of Flashman? How did you get the idea of Flashman, and when are we going to get his US Civil War memoirs, are questions which I have ducked more often than I can count. To the second, my invariable response is, "Oh, one of these days," followed, when the inquirer is an impatient American, by the gentle reminder that to an old British soldier like Flashman, the unpleasantness between the states is not quite the most important event of the 19th century, but rather a sideshow, compared to the Mutiny or Crimea. Before they can get indignant, I add hastily that his Civil War itinerary is already mapped out. This is the only way of preventing them from telling me what it ought to be. To the question, how did I get the idea, I simply reply that I don't know. Who ever knows? Anthony Hope conceived The Prisoner of Zenda on a walk from Westminster to the Temple, but I doubt if he could have said, after the calendar month it took him to write the book, what triggered the idea. In my case, Flashman came thundering out of the mists of 40 years living and dreaming, and while I can list the ingredients that went to his making, heaven only knows how and when they combined. One thing is sure, the Flashman papers would never have been written if my fellow clansman Hugh Fraser, Lord Allender, had confirmed me as editor of the Glasgow Herald in 1966, but he didn't, the canny little bandit, and I won't say he was wrong. I wouldn't have lasted in the job, for I'd been trained in a journalistic school where editors were gods, and in 3 months as acting chief, my attitude to management, front office and directors had been that of a seigneur to his serfs. I had even put Fraser's entry to the House of Lords on an inside page, assuring him that it was not for the Herald, his own paper, to flaunt his elevation, and that a 2-column picture of him was quite big enough. How cavalier can you get? And doubtless I had other editorial shortcomings. In any event, faced with 20 years as deputy editor, which means doing all the work without getting to the big dinners, I promised my wife I would write us out of it. In a few weeks of thrashing the typewriter at the kitchen table in the small hours, Flashman was half finished, and likely to stay that way, for I fell down a waterfall, broke my arm, and lost interest, until my wife asked to read what I had written. Her reaction galvanized me into finishing it. 1 draft, no revisions, and for the next 2 years it rebounded from publisher after publisher, British and American. I can't blame them. The purported memoir of an unregenerate blackguard, bully and coward, resurrected from a Victorian school story, is a pretty eccentric subject. By 1968 I was ready to call it a day, but thanks to my wife's insistence and George Greenfield's matchless knowledge of the publishing scene, it found a home at last with Herbert Jenkins. The manuscript looking, to quote Christopher McLeod's, as though it had been round the world twice. It damn nearly had. They published it as it stood, with, to me, bewildering results. It wasn't a bestseller in the blockbuster sense, but the reviewers were enthusiastic. Foreign rights, starting with Finland, were sold, and when it appeared in the USA, 1/3 of 40-odd critics accepted it as a genuine historical memoir, to the undisguised glee of the New York Times, which wickedly assembled their reviews. "The most important discovery since the Boswell papers," is the one that haunts me still, for if I was human enough to feel my lower ribs parting under the strain, I was appalled, sort of. You see, while I had written a straightforward introduction describing the discovery of the papers in a sale-room in Ashby de la Zouche, that ought to have warned them, and larded it with editorial footnotes, there had been no intent to deceive. For one thing, while I'd done my best to write, first person in Victorian style, I'd never imagined that it would fool anybody. Nor did Herbert Jenkins, and 50 British critics had recognized it as a conceit. The only one who was half doubtful was my old chief sub on the Herald, called on to review it for another paper. He demanded of the Herald's literary editor, "This book o' Geordie's isn't true, is it?" And on being assured that it wasn't, exclaimed, "The conniving bastard," which
Sample complete. Ready to continue?